This is the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Hello and welcome to Chewing the Cud podcast. My name's Andrew Jones and, well, unusually, Sarah's right in front of me. Hello, Sarah.
Hello, it's nice to actually be face-to-face.
I know, we haven't done a face-to-face intro for a very long time.
It seems a long time.
It does. But anyway, as we record this, we've just been recording one face-to-face, which we don't. This last year, we haven't done so many of, and I do miss them.
Definitely. I think they're nicer.
They are, but I guess as our guests have widened, we've done more virtually, haven't we? But anyway, so on to today's podcast. It's April. The soil temperatures should now be warming up. It's a good time to be thinking about clovers. Originally, the idea of this, I think I mentioned it in the podcast, came from a farmer from Northern Ireland, I think it was, who said, I'd love you to do one on clovers. So here we are. So we are always open to ideas. If anyone's got any ideas for future podcasts, please do let us know. We're more than open to them.
Definitely. And I think clover's really important, particularly as looking at the price of nitrogen.
Well, I was just thinking that given as we record this, I'm told there is no nitrogen currently available. Yes, it's going to be an interesting season if this continues as it is.
Yeah, so obviously clover has got its role in fixing nitrogen, obviously got its role in increasing intakes of grass as well. So
definitely.
Really important.
Though I will say, I'm not sure if I say it in the podcast, if you ever ensile clovers, ideally you should be using an additive. So I'll put that in now. But otherwise SFIs as well.
SFI, it's still on the SFI. I think it's something like just over £100 a hectare payment. So
I can't answer that one.
I think, my view is, even if there wasn't a payment, I still think it's worth putting in clover, but as there's a payment as well, makes it even more worthwhile.
Well, I mean, certainly conversations I've had with other people in the past, if you go back to the 70s, I'm assuming this is before common agricultural policy and things seem to get a little bit more monoculture, there was a lot more clovers grown than what there are now. So they seem to be coming back in, but historically they seem to have been a lot more of them. But anyway, we're starting to witter a little bit. So why don't we all go listen to this podcast on clovers? This podcast has been brought to you today by Chewing the Cud Limited, who offer completely independent dairy and beef nutrition, cow signals advice and training, along with ROMS mobility scoring. For more details on these and other services available, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on nutrition@chewingthecud.com. Chewing the Cud Limited now offers first aid training from a registered first aid at work trainer and experienced minor injuries practitioner. For more details, please visit our website www.chewingthecud.com or email us directly on training@chewingthecud.com. Hello, I'm Andrew Jones.
And I'm Sarah Bolt.
And welcome to the Chewing the Cud podcast, a podcast for the UK dairy industry.
Farmer, advisor, processor, and everyone else. We have topics and episodes that will interest you.
We discuss the practical and the technical aspects of different UK dairy industry topics.
We aim to make you think about what you're doing and ask yourself, can it be done differently?
Listen to us speak with specialists from inside and outside the industry about their area of expertise.
Subscribe and listen to episodes for free on your favourite podcast platform.
Sign up to our website, www.chewingthecud.com, for podcast notifications so you never miss an episode.
And links to our socials, including Instagram, Chewing the Cud Podcast, all one word, and remember, no G.
Or email us direct on podcast@chewingthecud.com.
If you like what we do, please share and leave us a review to show your support. And that's it. Enjoy today's episode.
Hello and welcome back to Chewing the Cud podcast. Our guest today is John Spence from Limagrain. Hello, John. How are you doing?
I'm very well, thanks, Andrew. Yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, more than welcome. More than welcome. So today, this podcast all came about because a listener reached out a little while ago. I've got to be honest, it's a long time ago, so I can't remember who you are or exactly where you are. I think you were Northern Ireland somewhere. Reached out and said they'd love us to do a talk on clovers and their value in terms of forage production and what they can add to your ley, to your feed, your silage going forward. So John got volunteered by someone as the best person to speak to on this. So fingers crossed, hey? But before we do what we usually do, John, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, so thanks for inviting me. So I'm Forage Crops Product Manager for Limagrain. So within Limagrain, we pretty much cover all species. My kind of remit within that is all things forages, with the exception of forage maize, where a colleague of mine, Tim Richmond, looks after that. So that means all forage grasses and clovers, forage brassicas, so kales, swedes, stubble turnips, forage rape, main crop turnips. I also get a bit involved in environmental mixtures, so whether that's pollen and nectar, wild bird seeds, anything for any of the environmental schemes within the UK. So yeah, a very varied bunch of products, but yeah, included within that, the clovers, reds and whites, and anything else that we think might be of use or of interest to the UK industry.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I guess let's start with the basics. Primarily, probably we're going to talk about reds. I don't know. We'll see where this goes. But let's talk about the basics in terms of the differences. I mean, I know things are changing because you've got large leaf white clovers and all that, but traditionally you would talk about a white clover as being closer to the ground, more for grazing. You'd talk about a red clover as being a taller and more for silage leys. That would be fair enough, wouldn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. So I think within England, but and within the UK as a whole, and white clover is the sort of primary species, if you like, and I would generally recommend a white clover in any good grazing ley or any long-term ley. But as you say, it's closer to the ground. Basically, a lower growing point is the key aspect with the white clover, so it will stand grazing better. Red clovers are taller, a higher growing point, and so taller, and so add more from a silage perspective, but generally speaking don't stand grazing as well, or there is a danger of overgrazing, grazing too low, taking out that growing point and therefore killing the plant. And in terms of longevity as well, so the reds, 3 years is a typical lifespan. We are talking about moving perhaps 3 to 4 years as the breeding improves and the genetics improve. White clovers are perennials; they spread by stolons, and so yeah, indefinite in terms of how long they last if managed in the right way, basically. So yeah, it's simple terms: whites for grazing, reds for cutting.
As I say, the lines are beginning to get blurred, aren't they? As I know, some are breeding, bear with me if I get this word right, stoloniferous reds. And as you say, some reds are now, if they're managed correctly, you said 3 to 4, certainly people talk 4 to 5 years. And then some people are talking about whites for cutting using is it the big broadleaf whites can fit into a cutting ley as well. So the lines are starting to get blurred a little bit, aren't they?
Yeah, and it's, I think, my key role, if you like, in putting together grass mixtures and choosing the right varieties is knowing what those qualities are, and matching them as well as possible to the needs of the grower at the end of the day. So
any other clovers we should be thinking about that we don't? I mean, they're the traditional too, but I mean, I can throw one straight in the mix of, well, I know it's something else, but it's usually referred to as a Persian. I think some people might even call it pink clover. But are there others that are available that maybe people aren't aware of or aren't used very often? I mean, I'm sure there are, but you know what I mean?
Yeah, and there are a range of different clovers, whether that's, as you mentioned, sort of Persian or Allsike, or again, I'm getting into other legumes, things like bird's foot trefoil that have become more common because of the herbal ley situation that's happened over the last few years. Um, I think they all have their own individual qualities. It's my own personal view, but I think we have some very good breeding in reds and whites. And I think particularly if people are looking to add more protein, looking to add a legume into a grass ley, it start with the basics first, the ones that we know work, that are reliable, and to be honest, it's where a lot of the breeding effort has gone into in this country. So reds and whites are still key. You mentioned some of the other sort of advances. So grazing red clovers are sort of here or certainly on the horizon, and that's effectively breeding a red clover which has this lower growing point. So you get the benefits in terms of the taller growth habit, the higher yields, but you're able to graze it more safely without the risk of killing it effectively. So they're in their infancy, but we have them in trial. We're monitoring them, and if we see a benefit and a place in a mixture, we'll be using them.
So I guess we are seeing more and more clovers, or more and more clovers within leys, and some of this is down to sort of SFIs and that side of things. And I know certainly at King's Hay we've been for years talking about the benefits of clover in leys, but perhaps is it worth just sort of touching on what the benefits are and perhaps why they were in the SFIs and that side of things?
Yeah, so the key benefits are protein, so a higher protein content. So whether red or white, I don't like quoting sort of definite figures for some of these things because it always depends. It depends on the maturity. It depends when it's cut. It depends on the content in a ley. But typically, and the figure that I do often quote is you'll be perhaps 3 or 4% more protein if you've got either a white or a red clover than you do if you have just a straight grass ley. So protein is one. The nitrogen fixation is another. So again, there are textbook figures on this, but a white clover around about 30% in the ley, I think is quoted at being about 160 or so kilos of nitrogen in terms of what that is fixing. So basically, the rhizobacteria in the sort of the root nodules are fixing nitrogen for the sort of the surrounding grasses. So yeah, protein. What else haven't I talked about? Protein, nitrogen fixation, and the key one really, I suppose, particularly the white clovers, is growth pattern. So with grasses, a typical grass growth curve, or when it's putting on its yield, is obviously the springtime and in the autumn. So you have this dip over the summer, and it's basically when, if we do get a decent summer, it's when there's not a lot of moisture about, and the grass growth slows. And that's when the clovers, deeper rooted, are able to take over. So their growth in the spring and the autumn is maybe not as high as the grass, but then when the grass is lower, then you've got more consistent sort of forage production because the clovers are there. So those are the three key things for me. What we tend to see in terms of what we're supplying to our customers is it's the market is swinged, or the popularity is swings with fertiliser prices quite a lot as well. So probably, I'm trying to think how long ago it was now, 3 years, 4 years ago, whenever
it doubled in price, didn't it?
The nitrogen price went crazy.
They took out, they invaded Ukraine, wasn't it? Because I remember who I was working for had a fertiliser tender at the time, and I had a price from one company and they withdrew it, and everyone else went, we're not doing anything, and it just went mad, didn't it?
Yeah, and so at that point, all of a sudden, all of those people who had probably sprayed out of their clover out of their leys, or they didn't want to spend the extra money to put it in the first place, all of a sudden clovers were back on the agenda. And for me, that was it's a bit of a shame, because they're a very valuable part of any grass mixture. even if they didn't fix any nitrogen, and the protein and digestibility I'd not mentioned either. So the D value of both reds and whites is significantly better.
So we were talking there a little bit about the sort of drought tolerance because of their deep rooting, and I guess you've got the benefits of that deep rooting as well in the soil structure and all of those sorts of things that go alongside it.
Yeah, so you mentioned the popularity in terms of SFI of late and their inclusion within herbal leys, and that's because of the deep-rooted nature of both of those species, and that gives you, firstly, it helps improve the soil structure for a following crop, but it adds resilience into the mixture. So yeah, that drought tolerance means that, going back to the growth pattern again that we talked about, particularly over those summer months, if the grass does burn off, you've got the legumes there still romping away and offering a good forage.
Oh, I mean, I've definitely seen examples. A client not a million miles away from me, that in the summer, whichever dry summer it was a few years ago, was it 22, and you had all the lovely red clovers were there growing over the top, and everything else underneath was green, whereas the fields where it didn't have the red clovers were brown. And everything was green, just that little microclimate that as soon as that weather broke, it just burst into life again, because the red clovers had just helped, had the tolerance and just kept everything else going. Your comment there about interesting in terms of, it's increased again with SFIs recently. As somebody told me, back in the 70s, there used to be a lot more clover grown than what there is now. And I suppose probably due to good old common agricultural policy, a lot of them got killed out, and we've just gone for pure ryegrasses. But I mean, clovers add so much to the mixture, don't they?
Yeah, they do, and again, a little bit of preparation for today. I looked at similar figures like that, and back in the 70s, before my time, there was more clovers, and particularly more red clover used. I've been I've been within this business for just getting on for 19 years now, and so in my time, there hasn't been too much of a change in the popularity, albeit I've tried, and as a business, we've tried over the years to get people to switch back, if you like, and to make sure that they have got clovers within any grass ley that they're buying, or maybe adding it in later. But this situation with the SFI, which has encouraged this, which is good as far as I'm concerned, but it has meant that to a certain degree it's caught them, the producers out a little bit. So, and it's maybe one comment for today, that because of what has happened with SFI, and not just within the UK, or SFI is obviously England only, but herbal leys in both Scotland and Wales as well are being sort of subsidised to a degree. But across the world, there is an increased interest in things like red and white clover. This year in particular, so harvest 25 for white clovers has not been good, not great either for reds. So going into 2026, potentially, if you want to make sure that you've got seed supply, it's have a look at it as soon as possible, basically.
Well, I mean, you mentioned why in the UK, but why do you think elsewhere? Because of more interest in improving soil structure, or why do you think there's been a drive that's caught everybody out, or increased fertiliser prices, or combination of all of the above? Or
I think a combination of all of the above, and it's those environmental schemes that we see here are being the environmental schemes here are similar to those that are being carried out in other European countries in particular as well. So they have similar aims, and that's reducing inputs, and reducing fertiliser use, reducing bleaching and any sort of nitrate issues like that. But also from a pollen and nectar point of view, the clovers are very, very good from a pollen perspective. Those clovers are very good from a nectar perspective, shall I say? Good for the bees. Good for the bees.
Yeah. So we've covered various different bits, but like But for white clovers now, you have different leaf sizes and that. What does that mean? Where do they fit into things? Because my understanding, like the broad leaves, I think I've already said, are more for looking at maybe a dual purpose cutting lay. I mean, from your point of view, where do the different leaf sizes, what does that mean for people?
Yeah, so within white clovers, the different varieties there are a range of different leaf sizes. So there isn't a very narrow group of small, medium, and large. It's a continuation, if you like. But from a recommended list perspective, they're put into classifications of small, medium, and large. Typically, the small leaf white clovers are lower yielding, but more persistent and more tolerant of close grazing. So particularly with sheep grazing, you would want to have a mixture with an amount of small leaf white clover in there. At the opposite end of the scale, the large leaf clovers, because of those larger leaves, offer more yield, but they tend to be slightly less persistent than some of the smaller ones. And when you're putting together a mixture, so we put together a grass mixture, but we also used potentially 3 or maybe 4 different clover varieties within a blend as well. And so that would be, if it was a dairy focused white clover blend, I would sort of err towards the medium to large clovers, because they're more upright and they're offering more yield. And with dairy cows, there's no persistency problem, using a medium or a large leaf clover. If it's a sheep-based mix, then the opposite is true. So you're looking at smaller leaf white clovers. You have that slight yield penalty, but you've got the persistence, it stands the grazing, and a general purpose mixture as the most popular grass mixtures in the UK, whether it's from ourselves or from anybody, is always the long-term dual purpose type mix, and for that we would use a blend of all 3. So you're covering all bases to give a mix which is sort of flexible in its performance, basically.
Is there anything like that in the reds at all?
Yeah, so with reds, it's not so much about leaf size, but there are different varieties have different sort of traits in terms of growth habits. So we mentioned about the longevity of some of the varieties. So you do get red clovers that, I mean, I'm still wary of saying that it will be lasting 5 years, but certainly 3 to 4. I would always I'm going to try and get this right the way around. I would say over-promise and under-deliver, but that's absolutely not what I want to say at all. Under-promise, over-deliver. And so I would always say 3 years. Look at it after 3 years and make a judgment on what the content is then. But no, with different varieties, some last longer than others, but the growth pattern through the year is slightly different too. So you'll find that if you have a variety that has been perhaps bred in sort of Scandinavian regions where their growing season is shorter, the yields will still be pretty good, but it will probably all come in the first cut, maybe with a little bit added in the second cut. Third cuts might be quite low. If it's the opposite side of that is something that might take a little bit longer to get going, and so the first cut will be okay, but you might see a bit more yield than other varieties in perhaps second and third. So again, we tend to look at the qualities of those different varieties and tend not to just sell one red clover on its own, tend to put it in a blend. And it's with all of these things, for me, it's about consistency of performance, not through the years, but it's within the year as well, basically trying to make sure from a size perspective that it's as consistent as possible from at each cut.
So you're talking about red clovers there, and is that both red clovers as a monoculture or red clovers in with like an Italian blend or something? What would you do you see both?
We tend not to differentiate for whether it's just a straight mixture or whether it's sown with grasses. I think, you might tell me differently in your experience, but I don't think there is a huge amount of straight red clovers sown anymore. It tends to be alongside grasses. and obviously because of that, the nature of them being 3 or 4 years, it tends to be more of a hybrid mixture, purely on the basis that hybrids last you 3-4 years, and so you're getting the best sort of balance of in terms of yield and persistency with those. If you want a really sort of high quality red clover and grass mixture, you'd put perennials with it as well. So you might not quite get the same yields as you would with a hybrid, but the grass quality would be better than it would be with a hybrid. But yeah, there's not so much sowing straight that I'm aware of in any case. But the principles would be the same, I think. So yeah.
It was before my time at Kingshay, so I mean I've been with Kingshay for 8 years, but certainly before that they did quite a big trial, or looking at sort of red clovers, monocultures, and what have you. But I have to say that you just don't see.
Was it for horses historically or something? I think, I don't quote me on that one. I don't know. But what I will ask though, and that is, I suppose, for want of a better word, a criticism usually of the red, and I think you might have answered it in your previous answer, is the fact that it's usually slow to get going the first year, and you only really see, for a crop that's, as we say, let's take traditionally only there for 3 years, you only really see the benefit in years 2 and 3. What would your comments on that be?
Yeah, I mean it's a difficult one. Yes, you're right. I mean, so the first year, it's perhaps almost treating it in the first year, yeah, just like a grass silage crop, but perhaps leaving it a little bit later, so later to cut. And the reasons for that, well, making an assumption firstly that it's spring sown, so we haven't really covered that. So in terms of sort of a sowing date, I mean April time onwards, when there's a decent sort of soil temperature, but sown April time, if that clover is allowed to flower in the first year, it has a better chance of, in particular, the root nodules becoming sort of better established, and a better chance of it going on for those 3 years or so.
If you're talking spring sown, we should say, how late can you go into the autumn for an autumn sown, given that the majority of resowing is done in the autumn?
Yeah, so it comes down to soil temperature. So, I mean, ideally August.
You don't really want to go after the end of August, do you? Ideally,
no. I mean, when you get it, again, it depends how open the year is, if you like, how mild an autumn you get. So again, it comes down to putting an absolute sort of set date on it. But I think if you were to say August, any later as well, and there's a very high risk of basically the plant being established enough to survive any winter. So
when they want 6 weeks to establish, really, is that right?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah. But I think for me, sort of spring sown is the best option. So yeah, April, May into June, possibly even if you're reseeding after first cut, something like that might work quite well in terms of that timing. As an aside, similar sort of timing for white clovers too. Both of them prefer slightly warmer soil temperatures. And yeah, just, in the autumn, it's you're better off sort of a late summer rather than an early autumn, if you like, again, just to ensure that you get a decent sized plant going into the winter.
So by that, I'm guessing what you're advocating almost is just sow your grasses in the autumn and then sow your clovers in the spring. Would that be a fair comment? And it allows you then a bit of weed control or whatever you if you need it?
Do you mean in terms of sort of overseeding the clovers into it?
Yes.
Afterwards,
so putting your grasses in the late summer, early autumn, get that lay established, and especially if you've got some weed problems, then that allows you to get maybe 1 or 2 instances of weed control in there, and then maybe after first cut, then you apply your clover seed, whether it's mixed in with some slurry or however that happens to be, to then let that establish and go from there.
it's certainly possible. I'll be honest, it's with a white clover definitely. With a red clover, I would much prefer to put the clover and the grass in together, I think, and have them establishing at the same time. It's just the competitive, the competitive nature of it. I think with the red clover, it's more important to get it right, I feel, somehow. And so overseeding a red clover into grass, there is a slight risk that you don't get as good a take. You potentially putting on a higher seed rate with the red clover, and so a slightly more cost to that. And I'd rather get it right from the off, sort of thing. So the red clover for me in that mixture is the priority. That's where you're using that to get the protein. So I would be tempted to do it right for what the red clover wants, as opposed to trying to put it in with on top of the grasses. The white clover is a little bit different, and also just because I've seen it done very successfully, and exactly as you've said. So that is establishing the grass, making sure it's a nice clean sward, no weed control issues. If there are weeds, getting them controlled, and then overseeding the white clover. And that works really well.
So you've mentioned some things there about establishment. What else do farmers need to consider when they are establishing a clover ley over just an ordinary grass ley?
I think to answer that question, it's very similar to grasses, really. I think the advice doesn't change too much, and that's it's. So we've talked about soil temperature and sowing date, so that's critical. With any reseed, whether it's grasses or whether it's clovers, always take a soil sample, or at least know that you've had one done relatively recently, because it's very, very rare that we have establishment complaints. But if we do, the very first thing that I ask is, have you got a soil sample? And the answer is, oh, I think I've done it, and then it gets dug out of the cupboard, and it was 10 years ago. It's like, right, okay.
So what are the ideals in terms of pH and I suppose P and K for a clover establishment?
It's 6. It's 6.
Similar, so it's got to be similar to grass, really. Anyway, hasn't it? But
it is. So it's a soil sample. It's making sure that any of those deficiencies are kind of sorted before you go and throw some seed at it. Sowing depth is key as well. Again, with grasses, they're small seeds. They like to be close to the surface. And there's an old sort of adage as well in terms of firmness of seedbed, of wanting to be able to ride your bike over it. I hope somebody doesn't claim that I hope someone doesn't claim that was theirs, because that was been told to me in the last 20 years, and I think it's been around a very long time. But yeah, so it's a nice fine seedbed, but firm as well, not sown too deep, so within the top sort of 5 mil or so, really, and rolled afterwards, possibly even rolled again after that. But it's the same as for grass. The key difference between establishing a grass ley and establishing a clover is the timing. So you can get away with sowing a grass a little bit earlier in the spring and a little bit later in the autumn, just because they will germinate at slightly cooler temperatures.
Red clovers, if we're talking about feeding them, the one I certainly get asked, and I know the answer I get given, but people always still worry about traditionally red clovers and bloat. Where do things stand now regarding red clovers and bloat? I know what I keep being told, but you tell us what's your answer to that question.
The answer is not much has changed, and I think from my side as someone hopefully giving advice to farmers, I would always err on the side of caution. But I think with bloat, I don't feel like it's a common problem, and particularly if it is a grass and clover ley. So if it's a grass and red clover, the chances of bloat are quite small.
Well, I was going to say the one I keep getting is, modern varieties, you don't get the problems that you used to with older varieties.
I don't know of any good reason why that might be. But is the honest answer there.
I I wonder if it's related to actually the amount of clover that we're growing. You're saying back in the 70s we saw a lot more clover leys. They potentially had maybe a higher percentage clover in them as well, because farmers were used to growing the clover, and therefore perhaps we saw more bloat then. I don't know.
I think with bloat, it is a problem that people have these memories of several decades ago, and those messages have it is, and those messages have followed through. I think you still need to be aware. You still need to be we know that it could potentially be an issue, and so the things to overcome that are sowing a grass and clover mixture rather than just straight red on its own. But it's also making sure that you're not just letting very hungry animals out onto a very high clover forage, because that's potentially asking for trouble. So, but I think within a seed mixture, you're probably 30% or so red clover, 70% grass. You might go a bit higher than that, but if you've got if it's 50-50, you've got a good content of grass there to, if you like, dilute the potential issue. I've not heard of any issues with clovers and bloat in the 20 years that I've been dealing with it. So
I've come across it a little bit, but it seems to be that it happens on certain farms in certain fields repeatedly. So there might be something that's very different about those particular fields. And my little nugget of wisdom, I think farmers have shared with me that putting oil in the water trough is one of their little bloat preventions.
It's oil in the water. Just some plain vegetable oil in the water usually helps any problems like that. I can't remember exactly, but I think it helps that oil slick on top and stops them blowing up in the same way. I think that's what it is. But I guess the other one is when to harvest a red clover, because that's definitely changed. I mean, it used to be like, wait till it's flowered, but I mean, more and more, later stuff I've been told, and that's a few years ago now, was, you only got to wait for them to be bud almost, and you should harvest a red clover. I mean, what's your recommendations for that?
Yeah, I think the general recommendation is 50% flowering, but I think again, it comes back to it depends. So with both grasses and the clovers, in terms of their digestibility, their feed quality, and their protein content. So obviously, the longer you leave it, the more yield you get. With clovers are less impacted by a change in digestibility as they mature, but there is a slight change. But certainly, the protein content is higher if you harvest it sooner. So there's this balance between, do I want to maximize yield or do I want maximum quality? And with the clovers and grasses, that's important. But like I say, you're adding the red clover for protein, and you harvest it slightly earlier, you're likely to have a higher protein content.
I was going to say, I have seen some red clover silages that they've left it too late, and that's the bit the cows don't want to eat, where you can tell it is the flowered red clover, and they're the bits the cows aren't eating. It might have got the protein up, but they don't want to eat it, and which was definitely interesting. But I suppose the comment I just made, maybe not relevant, but I guess it's like, if you can grow grass, you can grow clover, can't you? Basically, it's very similar.
Yeah, I think so. And going back to the different species available, I'm all up for trying new things. I mean, we have our own trial site where we're looking at new things all the time, but we know that reds and whites work, and especially thinking about other legumes, so things like sainfoin and lucerne. Again, both really, really good species in their own right, in the right place. But if you make the comparison, for example, with lucerne, again, there are quite a lot of change in breeding, and some lucernes will stand, if you like, slightly more marginal conditions now than they perhaps used to. But if you're in northern England on a wet, horrible site and you want more protein, you're not going to grow lucerne. You're going to go with a red clover. It's sticking to what works. I think it's a simple thing on that front.
you mentioned lucerne. A simple one I always remember is lucerne doesn't like getting its feet wet, does it? So as you say, if you've got wet, don't bother with lucerne. It's not going to do the job.
It's a brilliant crop in nice free draining soils. Good sort of balanced pHs, and it will do really, really well. But if people are sort of experimenting with different species and they want to try something, have a go with red clover first, I think, because it's the more robust of those protein type crops.
So when it comes to sort of harvesting a high red clover silage, I remember hearing about sort of the leaves shattering and that side of things. So what's the best advice to try and avoid that and avoid those losses?
I think it's wilting, and I remember the percentage off the top of my head. I think around 30%. I think is the standard sort of protocol, if you like. But I think again, probably not quite the issues that you might get with things like lucerne again. So yes.
Yeah.
Well, the one thing I'll throw in there is if you are going to have a high clover silage or any clover silage, you definitely want to use a silage additive. Because it's the clovers act as a buffer, don't they, and don't allow you to have that rapid drop in pH that you want for the fermentation. So if you're going to be harvesting clovers, you really, even if it's part of a mix, you really want to make sure you're using an additive at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I'm not in the business of selling additives. So, but at the same time, I am in the business of supplying the best sort of quality forage mixtures and making sure that people make the most of that. And again, another thing another saying that somebody else has said over the years, and so I apologise to the person who said it, but it's sort of I don't shortcut the shortcut, if you like. Or basically don't take shortcuts with any of these things. It's if you're going to do it and you're going to spend the money on putting clover in a ley, it's making sure you get the maximum out of it, and so a little bit more on an additive to maintain that quality and to make sure that the fermentation is good. It would be well worth it in my view. And another comment on that, I suppose. So yes, the clovers are high in protein, but they are lower in sugars. And so if you have a higher clover content, you're likely to have a lower sugar content, and those sugars are helping with the fermentation process as well. So potentially, using additive is not bad advice.
Well, I guess like you say, John, we're not here to sell additive. We're here to give the best advice we can. And certainly that's the advice I would give anyone is if you've got a clover, use an additive.
No, agreed. Certainly agreed, yeah.
I guess so one of the other things that just thinking about is, actually analysing our silages once we've got those, and clovers don't or historically haven't analysed as well as they've perhaps fed. Have you got any comment to make on that? Or
do you mean in terms of so the actual analysis figure doesn't seem representative of how the animal's performing?
Yes,
yeah.
I think maybe it's down to the NIR analysis and
not
being able to handle those high clovers. I don't know.
Possibly, it's quite an interesting point because particularly, again, the popularity of herbal leys or multi-species leys, whatever you would like to call them, over the last few years, knowing the nutritional value of that silage is more difficult than it ever has been. And I know there are projects underway at the minute to attempt to build NIRS calibrations for multi-species leys. I'll be honest, I think it is a very admirable aim, but knowing how...
The problem with the multi-species leys, I mean, you say like yourselves, because we spoke to Richard, didn't we, from Trowel about it, and I know they were talking about it, is you see those diagrams and especially the multi-species leys, they change from week to week, month to month, year to year over the course of 5 years, that no week is ever the same in terms of what the makeup is in terms of clover or percentage of grass or whatever it happens to be. And as you say, it'll be great if it works, but it seems to be a bit of a hard one to what's your calibration to use, because it changes so much.
that's exactly the problem, and so we have our own internal leys machines, and we have calibrations for grass. We have calibrations for grass and clover, and they're based on, if you like, a typical proportion of grass and clover in a mixture, and they're pretty good. They're pretty good, but
sorry, we should say NIS, near infrared spectroscopy.
Spectroscopy.
Yes. Just in case anyone's listening.
Yeah. So the calibrations are always compared against wet chemistry. So the calibrations will only ever be as good as the wet chemistry, if you like. You can't, because that's what they're based on. The NIS will never be better than. But the proportion of those different species, as you say, will vary so much. You can't build a calibration, for example, red clover and one for white clover and then one for chicory and one for plantain, and then kind of put them all together. It's all about that one sample at one time, and there's so much variation. It'd be a very, very difficult thing to do.
To be honest with you, my recommendation always is with clients, if we've got a heavy clover ley, is do the NIR for the sample, but then go and get a wet chem done on the crude protein. It can vary as much as, I think I've had a sort of 1-2 points almost variation between the NIR and the wet chem. But certainly if you've got a high clover silage, then my conversation with the client would be, okay, let's do it like normal, but let's then go get a wet chem on the protein at least once during the season to see where we're at.
No, I think that's probably good advice, but and be a little careful, because I don't want to put anybody off taking samples and trying to find out what it is that they are feeding, because that's the absolutely critical part.
Yes, definitely. And that's why I'd sort of say at least once a season, maybe do a wet just to know where you are in relation. But yeah, exactly. You should be regularly sampling your forages to be able to make the most of them and know where you are. We're talking grasses and clovers, but the best example I always know is a client of mine when I first started doing them. We don't need to worry about maize. Maize is maize. I said, let's just go sample it. So we went and sampled it, and it saved him 0.5 kilo a blend a head per day. And he's like, okay. So he just doesn't quiver anymore. He's like, yeah, fine, get on with it. And it just proves itself. You need to sample these things to know what's going on.
No, definitely, and it's something that's sometimes a little frustrating, and measuring. And I think listening to some of your other podcasts in the past, and people talking about, it's obviously, you can't change what you can't measure, and those sort of comments, and this is the same. So yes, with silage analysis, but using plate meters and actually measuring the silage, as someone who is spends an awful lot of time putting together the best possible mixtures, for people then not to be able to measure the difference between a good and a bad is very frustrating. But your comments about maize and the potential consistency issues there, well, that's magnified in grasses, and maize is obviously a one cut harvest, and so you have got what you've got to a degree from that one cut, albeit yes, there will be variation within that. You take grasses, and first cut will be different to second cut, which will be different for third cut. Every field will potentially have a different mixture in it, and like I say, that's part of what I attempt to do sometimes is it's knowing the value of the varieties that we use, attempting as much as possible to give as consistent a performance as we can through the year. There will still be lots of variation, though.
Well, variation, the one I always quote is I remember going to Reading University a number of years ago, and they'd done a trial, I think it's Chris Reynolds, and they were feeding 14, 16 and 18% crude protein diets. And you could say, ironically, they were balancing it daily with how much soya they fed to get it. But they put up on screen, they had a handheld NIR on farm, and they put up on screen the variation of day to day of that grass sample. And it wasn't major, but it was still enough that it wasn't like a straight line. It was up and down daily, as you say, because each field varies, each cut varies, each day varies. And it is something people need to be aware of, and to make the most of it, you should be sampling regularly.
Yeah, and I've been asked at shows and other events oh, well, so what's the ME of your grass then? And it's like, oh, well, how long have you got? How long have you got? because I mean, even I mean, yes, there's quality data on the grass recommended lists, and that's a whole other topic that we could probably get into another day, perhaps, in terms of talking about recommended lists. And first comment is, please go and make sure you're aware that there is a grass recommended list and go and have a look at it. And
there is a clover recommended list as well. We should say, shouldn't we?
Yeah, there is. So but within that there is some quality data, but it's dare I say, a little on the limited side. Into it's great at comparing the different varieties, but again, this is my view. It's not a great reflection of how that variety is performing all the way through the year. And so what I've tried to do within our mixture formulations is basically we test the varieties, we look at recommended lists, we get all the information we can and put the mixture together, but then test the mixture as well, basically. And that's, so again, using the NIRS the near infrared spectroscopy that we talked about earlier, it's trying to test the quality at every cut or every simulated grazing, basically. And what you find in that is, in the springtime, grasses look really good. But come summer, come autumn, when sometimes these things aren't being measured, there are big differences there. And you can sometimes find that a particular variety might do really well in the spring, but it's not necessarily so good in the summer and the autumn. So it's about balancing it through the year again.
So a moment ago we spoke about value, and I guess perhaps it made me think about sort of the costs of actually, adding a clover to grass, or actually maybe it's not costs, maybe it's the benefits or the additional, value back. But can we perhaps have a bit of a discussion around that as to what the additional costs of putting clover versus what we're getting out?
So both reds and whites are usually a similar price per kilo of seed. The reds possibly slightly cheaper, but then you're generally using them perhaps 3 kilos an acre. I'm hopefully okay talking in acres rather than hectares, but normally around 3 kilos an acre in a mix compared to 1 kilo of whites. And per kilo, if you like, at farm, probably I'm going to roughly say about 12 quid an acre, something like, sorry, 12 quid an acre, 12 quid a kilo. I wish it was 12 quid an acre, but which is for whites, but so, and then if we mentioned earlier about potentially overseeding, not very common, not something I'd necessarily advise with the reds, but with the whites, a kilo to the acre is what we'd normally put into the mixture. You might want to think about perhaps going slightly higher in an overseeding situation, just to make sure you get a good establishment.
I know that when we last did our forage costings report here at King's Hay, would be back just on 5 years ago now. We last did that one, new one to be available soon, I'm hoping. I think that it was costing at about 3.7 pence a litre for grazed grass and reducing that down to about 3.3. So 0.4 pence a litre difference between straight grass and grass with clover as a pence per litre cost. So,
I mean, the trying to calculate the protein benefit cost or value, if you like, is difficult. I have in the past, and again, this is going back to the time when the fertiliser price was very high, is tried to look at what the savings are in terms of fertiliser costs, because we've talked about the benefits of using clovers being the protein, also the nitrogen and the digestibility, that nitrogen part. So again, I think you've mentioned the RB209, so the fertilizer recommendations, and that's a sort of again, I'm doing this off the top of my head, but I can't remember, that's 160 or 180 kilos of N per hectare. That is that grass is potentially fixing. So what that means is effectively, if you don't put any nitrogen on that grass ley, the yield that you get from it is equivalent to you applying 160 kilos of nitrogen. I think the figures for red clover are less readily available, but I think if anything, it's possibly slightly higher in terms of that nitrogen fixation. So when you have a red clover and grass ley, you might put perhaps, I think the recommendation, again, this is off the top of my head, is about 50 kilos of nitrogen at the establishment sort of phase, if you like. After that, it's unlikely to need certainly any more nitrogen. And so with that, yeah, you've got potentially 200 kilos or so worth of nitrogen that you're not adding and you're getting the yield from. So,
I was going to ask that. What's your comments on fertiliser? You've probably answered it, but I mean, there's some people argue that you certainly in spring you should put a little tickle on of nitrogen to help boost things along because the clover isn't, I suppose, warmed up and ready to go. Would you go with that, or?
Yeah, I would. Possibly, I'm always a little wary, and that's again because I would be trying to protect the clover as much as possible, and so I might even look at having maybe a slight hit in yield if that was going to happen in that sort of scenario, just to again prolong the life of the clover. And so if you add nitrogen to any clovers, it potentially impacts the persistency. Basically, the sort of the rhizobium, the kind of the nitrogen fixing factories, if you like, attached to the roots. It sort of turns them off basically if you start applying nitrogen, and you don't really want that to happen from a persistency point of view. But again, I put a disclaimer on that I'm not fax registered, and so other opinions might be might be relevant too. But and the other angle to that, I guess, as well is what happens in the following crop. So again, with sort of a white clover, I looked at this a little while ago, and I struggled to find, if you like, exact figures of what might happen in the following crop, but there'll certainly be an amount of nitrogen that's been produced, which is then available that you're not having to apply. I did find some data on red clover, and effectively it was a trial where they had sown a crop of red clover on one area, not on the others. But on the non-red clover area, they'd grown some maize at different nitrogen rates, and then compared the yield of the maize on the red clover to that of the different nitrogen rates. The assumption being that where the yields are the same, that's potentially the nitrogen level that's been given by that red clover, and that was around about the 60 kilos of nitrogen in the following crop. That was, but again, the it depends question that comes down to how long between taking out a red clover and putting in maize or putting in any following crop. Because if you if you tear it up in September and then leave the field bare and then put something in April, chances are there's not going to be a lot there. But if there's a shorter period of time from one crop to another, you've got a good chance of making use of that nitrogen you've just produced with the red clover.
I saw an interesting bit of research that came out of AFBI from their clover check this last season. I don't know if you've seen it, John, but it was looking at grass leys versus grass and clover leys, and actually the grass. I'm just looking at the work now that the grass by itself with no nitrogen actually outperformed the grass with 270 kilos of nitrogen.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's an interesting. It's a nice little bit of research. I'll share it with you.
Yeah, I think. I mean, do you think that is because
it was an odd season? 2025 was an odd dry season. I'm sure.
Obviously, typically the yield increases proportionately, but you get to a point, obviously, where then it starts to kill the crop effectively. So whether that's had an impact. Perhaps is worth mentioning that again, there's been lots of talk about herbal leys and lots of talk about if you like, the yield of those herbal leys in comparison to grass at, and again, I'm totally picking a number off the top of my head here, but grass with let's say 150 kilos of nitrogen applied, and saying the yield was equivalent in any, and that's, I don't dispute that in any way, shape, or form, but it's because of the clovers in there, basically, or it is normally because of the clovers in there. And so any research like that is done that highlights the benefits of those multi-species leys. If you look at the next pie chart or next bar chart, which shows grass and clover, you'll see that it's very, very similar. And I think the message there is growing grass on its own is just fine, but you will have to put some fertiliser on it to get the most of it. With a grass and clover or a multi-species, you don't have that issue.
One thing I do want to highlight is you mentioned multi-species, and that we sort of talked about before. Clovers do have a recommended list. Make sure you use that recommended list or look at that recommended list, because I know in a previous role I got approached by my boss and said, this guy's just brought a GS4, as it would have been, GS4 mix, and how does it compare to what we sell? So I went back and looked at it. We were, I don't know, $5, I don't know if it was even that more expensive. And he's like, well, why is that? And you started going through it and comparing. This was GS4, so it's before multi-species and SFIs. And what it was is there were clovers in there, but they were older varieties and all these sorts of things. So again, if you just want to make sure, in general, for any forage crop, you're on the recommended list to give you the best one, because just because they're available they've been pushed off the recommended list for a reason, and that's made them cheaper, but you're potentially losing out potential production benefits of not having that recommended varieties.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And for my sins, I sit on the recommended list crop committee. So I'm one of the panel of people that is helping make a decision on what goes on or doesn't go onto a list. And the most important thing is, when a new variety comes along and it's compared with its peers, it has to get onto that list. It has to be a clear improvement on those varieties around it. So it doesn't just have to be the same. It has to be, and it's judged by people within the trade like myself, but there are farmer participants as well. And between us, there are the key kind of agronomic characteristics of sort of yields and ground cover are looked at, and across that we need to see a clear improvement. And if it's not there, unfortunately, it gets thrown out. And there are, as you can imagine, a huge amount more don't make it than do. And when it's one of your own varieties, it's incredibly frustrating, because you put an awful lot of work into getting it there. But it's part.
It sounded like you're a voice of experience there, John.
Well, important to say as well that if there is something that you have a vested interest in, you're not allowed to vote. So, but it's frustrating, and I won't say where it.
The time and money to get to that point, it's a lot of money, as I know discussed before in other podcasts.
It is. It's a lot of time and money, and talking about the recommended list is good. I attended I think probably spoke at a farm meeting, which I won't say where it was, a few years back now, but a lot of the talk then was about the recommended list, and we had some printed copies, and hands up in the room of who has got a copy of the recommended list, and there's no hands. And how many people knew that there was a recommended list for grass, and there's maybe one or two out of 30 farmers. And I don't blame them for that. That's a failing of us in the trade, if you like, of not getting that messaging across. So it's well worth bringing up.
I was going to say, this last year they stopped printing copies as well, though, haven't they, for main distribution? But it's one of my Bibles. I do enjoy looking at it.
Again, for as someone who, amongst many other sort of roles within my business. I write and end up producing quite a lot of the literature that we put out there as well. And there was always a debate over printed copies, but I think generally speaking, it's nice to have a printed copy on your desk, isn't it? Of whatever that bit of literature might be sometimes.
Well, yeah, the so-called paperless office, it doesn't happen because you end up printing it out because it's easier to read it than it is to look on a screen and do it. So, but yes, definitely.
The next generation might be different.
Well, yeah. You're trying to say we're old, Sarah?
I didn't. Maybe in a roundabout way.
So, just looking at the time now, John, any last words of wisdom before we finish?
I think we've covered it quite well. I think the main thing is if you're not already familiar with some of these species, again, we're talking white clovers and red clovers, but any other forages really, it's just making sure that you're aware of them, and just doing a little bit of research. I think it's quite interesting within what I do that people don't talk so much about varieties. So they might talk about, I want some red clover, or I want some white clover, or I want some forage rape, or some fodder beet, or there's not so much interest in the individual varieties themselves. So I think it's firstly, finding out about the benefits and uses of those species, but just realizing that there are differences between, on a variety level as well. And there's a huge amount of work, if you like, in the background from a breeding perspective, from a research perspective, that goes into producing some of these things that are turning up on farm. And it's all done for a reason. And this is a bit of a gripe, but it costs money at the end of the day. And if something is a little cheaper, there's normally a reason for it.
No, Sarah?
I think, I'm going to put my King's Hay hat on for a moment, because at King's Hay we've championed the use of clovers in grass for 30-something years. And, it's great to be talking about it more. It's great to be seeing, the SFIs and more clover coming into our leys. And I just think it's a real benefit to farmers to look at what it can bring to their farms and their businesses. So if you're not already doing it, go out and look and see what you can do.
Well, first of all, I'd like to thank John for his time. Otherwise, I hope to our listener we've answered the questions that you wanted when we've done this. But if anybody else has got anything they'd particularly like us to cover, we're always welcome, or you're always welcome to reach out, because we're always happy to try and find somebody, even if it's somebody to find somebody to find somebody to try and talk about a particular topic. But otherwise, no, been fantastic talking about, we've gone back to some basics, talking difference between reds and whites, but just what these will bring in terms of drought tolerance, soil structure improvement, improved crude protein, what they bring, looked at the sowing of them, looked at some of the management for them, and more importantly, harvesting them and using them. So I think it's been a great conversation. So thank you very much, John. But otherwise, I guess it's a goodbye from me.
It's goodbye from me.
And a goodbye from me. And thank you very much for having me again.
Thank you very much. Thank you for listening to the Chewing the Cud podcast for the UK dairy industry, brought to you from the southwest of England and listened to around the world. Now for the really boring bit, I'm afraid, the legal disclaimer. The information provided during this podcast has been prepared for general information purposes only and does not constitute advice. The information must not be relied upon for any purpose, and no representation or warranty is given to its accuracy, completeness, or otherwise. Any reference to other organisations, businesses, or products during this podcast are not endorsements or recommendations of Chewing the Cud Limited. The views of Andrew Jones are personal and may not be the views of Chewing the Cud Limited, and the views of Sarah Bolt are personal and may not be the views of King's Hay Farming and Conservation Limited and any affiliated companies. For more information on the podcast and details of services offered by Chewing the Cud Limited, visit www.chewingthecud.com. Thank you and goodbye.